My name is Jason Vong and welcome to the Essential Guide to Mastering Sony Autofocus. Now, it doesn't matter if you're using a Sony cam from 10 years ago or even using the latest and greatest. By the end of the video, you'll understand all the most important settings to help you get tack-sharp images. Let's go!
Focus mode.
So out of the 5 options here, these are the only 3 that you need to care about. Autofocus single, autofocus continuous, and manual focus. So autofocus single is best for still subjects and autofocus continuous is good for moving subjects. When you're using autofocus single, the moment you half press the shutter, the focus stays locked at that distance. It won't follow your subject, so if you were to move around while keeping your shutter half pressed, the focus will not change. Whereas with autofocus continuous, when you're half pressed the shutter, the focus will follow the subject. So whether the subject is moving or you're moving, the camera will continuously reacquire focus, so long as you keep the shutter half pressed. Now, 80 to 90% of the time, I'm on autofocus continuous, even when the subject is a still object, like this rock right here. This is so I don't have to worry about changing between the different modes. Less things to have to worry about. If I need the camera to target a specific object or be in a specific position, I would tap on the screen or choose a spot focus point and move it to where it needs to be. And we'll go over how to be more accurate with spot focus throughout this video. Autofocus single is great in my opinion for consistency, especially when you're on a tripod taking over hundreds of photos of the same thing, like product photography, scanning documents, or even close-up macro photography. That's when you don't want your focus to go awry. And the way that I like to use manual focus is when I need to lock the focus down after I let my camera acquire focus. For photography, I typically do this when I'm shooting cityscapes, landscapes, time lapses, and long exposures.
My focus is you.
So here's a great example how utilizing manual focus can be very handy. I'm taking a series of images of the LA cityscape so that I can stitch it all together to make a high quality panorama. But if I let the camera autofocus every time I shift my framing, the focus for each photo will be all over the place. So instead, I let the camera acquire focus of the buildings first, then I lock my focus by switching over to manual focus. And I have a manual focus toggle shortcut programmed to one of my custom buttons on my camera.
My focus is you.
And I'll just take a bunch of overlapping photos across the scene. And voila! A beautiful sunset panorama of Los Angeles. Now the other 2 focus modes, again, I wouldn't worry about too much, but here's a quick summary of what they do. AFA, automatic autofocus. It's supposed to be smart enough to choose between single and continuous autofocus, but again, I just keep it on autofocus continuous. DMF, I don't even know what the D stands for, and it's also kind of funny that the Sony menu also doesn't know. It's the only acronym out of the entire options here that isn't spelled out. Anyway, what it does is that it autofocus for you first, and then we have the option to adjust the focus manually. But I mean, at that point, you might as well just be in manual focus. Let me know in the comments down below if you're a DMF. A dope-ass
Focus area.
Now, focus area is different from focus mode. Focus mode is how the camera acquires and maintains focus, whereas focus area determines where within the frame the camera focuses. So lots of great options here, and it can be overwhelming, so here's what I would recommend. If you're a casual user, stick with wide area. Wide takes a look at the entire frame and focuses on the most obvious thing. And when you need to focus on anything specific, use the spot focus point, and you can choose between small, medium, and large point. Let's take this landscape scenario for example. In wide area focusing, the camera will likely focus on a random part of town. But since I want to make sure Matterhorn, that mountain over there, is in focus, I would use spot focus and move it over to where it matters. And medium spot focus should be good enough for a mountain this big. If you have a model that's capable of touch autofocus, you have a couple of options. Touch focus just puts a focus point on where you tap on the screen, press center here to exit out of this mode, and the second option, and the one that I would highly recommend, is touch tracking autofocus. Same deal, you tap on the screen, but now it puts a tracking box on whatever it is you tapped on. If touch tracking autofocus option is grayed out for you, make sure your focus mode is set to autofocus continuous first. While touch autofocus does make casual shooting a whole lot easier, it can be a very slow process considering you would have to take one hand away from the camera to tap on the screen. And that might not always be ideal if you're photographing fast action events and your camera setup might be too heavy for only one arm to support. That's why these other focus areas here exist, so you can focus on getting the shot. Zone area only focuses on a portion of the screen, and this is incredibly helpful for framing. Let's jump into another scenario. I'm here at Disneyland capturing a parade, and I see Mickey Mouse on a float coming down, but he has a lot of dancers in front of him. If I set my focus area to wide, the camera will bound to focus on the human performers. So instead, I'm going to use zone focus and set it to the top of the screen so the camera will only focus in that space. Because Mickey is moving around a lot, I don't want to use a smaller focus point than zone because there will be a high chance where he will move away from it. On the flip side, sometimes zone can be too wide. Jumping into another scenario in this fashion model shoot, the moment their face is turned, the camera starts to focus on their shirt instead. And those little green focus dots are telling us that. So to ensure that I have the most accurate focus, I would switch over to spot focus and move it to their face. And a small focus spot should work well here. When it turns green like that, that means it got focus. And let me just be clear right now, while our cameras are very smart, there will be rare moments where it would have some hiccups, and that's okay. When it does happen, spot focus will usually solve our problems. And center area obviously only focuses in the middle. And again, center fixed indicator will go green when it hits exact focus. And these next two, I personally don't use myself, but handy to know in case it works for your style of photography.
Expand spot focusing.
Think of this as spot focusing, but a little more forgiving. Let's say you specify a point on your screen where you want the focus to be, but either you accidentally move a little bit or your subject accidentally move a little bit. The expand spot will pick up the focus surrounding your designated focus point.
Lock on autofocus and tracking.
Now, only camera models from 2019 and onwards will have this, or at least working the best. But basically, it's all the focus areas that we talked about, except now when you have pressed the shutter, it will put a tracking box on whatever subject it picks up until you let go. And this is the reason why touch tracking autofocus may not always be ideal. If you're shooting sports or anything fast action, you need to be ready to snap the shot in a moment's notice. And lock-on autofocus tracking will be a much better option to use. Moving on.
Focus settings.
Alright, so here we are in the menu, and for the most part, I leave a lot of the focus settings by their defaults. However, these are the ones that you need to be aware of. Autofocus illuminator. You'll find it easily on both the older and current menu systems. I highly recommend you turn this off. This is that obnoxious option that shoots a beam of orange light out into the darkness to help your camera achieve focus. But you don't want to be that person at a musical or a play firing orange beams of light at the performers. Okay, Mike? Turn that autofocus illuminator off. Switch VH autofocus area. Now this is handy if you're constantly switching between horizontal and vertical framing. It creates two different sets of focus areas for each orientation. For example, you might want to use center only when you're photographing horizontals and zone focus in verticals. And I utilize this feature a lot when I shoot concerts. Focus area color. Now cameras before 2019 might not have this, but you can actually change the color of your focus box, either between red or white. We're gonna need a blue in there too for our all-American friends.
Face and eye autofocus.
Welcome to what made Sony cameras famous. Face and eye autofocus. So if you have a camera model that was from 2014, then congratulations, you have the bare basic face autofocus. It might not track continuously, but hey, at least you have face recognition, and that's all you really need. Now, models that came out in 2015 and onwards will have a quality of life improvement that is called continuous eye autofocus tracking. So first things first, make sure face and eye autofocus frame display box is enabled. This gives you a preview of which face or eye the camera will focus on. Helpful for when you're in an area with lots of faces. It gives you a chance to select a different face or turn off face and eye autofocus priority when you're just trying to capture the cityscape or landscape. Now, if you're doing portraits, make sure to utilize the right and left eye select. Let's say, for example, you're photographing someone with long hair, and some of that long hair partially covers one of their eyes. The last thing you want is for the camera to focus on the eye with the hair that's blocking, and end up with a photo of their hair in focus. So what I would recommend is programming the right and left eye select option into your quick function menu, so you can change the eye priority when that happens. Now, if you don't have this option, don't worry. Use spot focusing and just move it to the other eye. Spot focusing pretty much solves a lot of our problems, especially when the key features of our subject are obstructed. A little bit of a John Cena for you. We still have a couple of things to go over, but if you've been enjoying this video and want to further support the channel, consider a super thanks donation. But the best support that you can always give us is by watching more of our videos, which I have a handy playlist of photography tutorials linked right up here for you to queue up.
Subject recognition, AI autofocus.
So not a whole lot for me to cover in this section, but I do want to offer some reassurance to all of my new and casual photographers. You don't need the latest and greatest AI autofocus. Most of the practical settings that we've went over today, wide, zone, center, spot, are available on the most basic Sony camera models to help us achieve the best focus possible. For example, if you don't have animal eye autofocus, you just need a little bit of patience and use spot focus and move it to their eyes. Utilizing the different focus areas and being as specific as possible will help you take tack-sharp images with any cameras. With that said, AI subject recognition can be very helpful if you want to specialize in taking photos of very specific subjects. If you love to take photos of your pets, animal eye autofocus is incredibly handy. Bird eye autofocus makes it incredibly easy for folks who want to get into bird photography. Car autofocus if you're into F1 or NASCAR. You get the picture, no pun intended. The only complaint that I see about AI subject recognition is why do we have to select the different subjects? Like if it's AI, shouldn't it be smart enough to detect an animal? Valid argument, but what happens when you have to photograph a human, an animal, and a bird all sitting inside of a car together and a plane is flying over on one shot? Okay, a pretty extreme example, but it helps to be specific so you can get the best results possible. I mean, that's a hell of a photo shoot.
Best practices.
So let's talk about the best autofocus practices that you should be doing to make your photography life easier. One, I highly recommend adding these options to your quick function menu: focus mode and focus area. Pretty obvious, but another one that I would highly recommend including is face and eye priority in autofocus. That way when you're not photographing human subjects, you can easily turn it off. And subject detection, so you can cycle through the different subject recognitions if you have it. Number 2, get into the habit of taking test photos and reviewing your photos quickly. In playback, press the enlarge button to see where the focus landed and if your shot is in focus. If not, readjust your focus point or even increase the shutter speed. Oftentimes, blur is mistaken for misfocus. Number 3, if your subject is moving very quickly, try burst continuous shooting so the camera will shoot several images at a time with hopefully a few in focus and in the action that you want it in. Number 4, shoot with a deeper depth of field. Just because you have a fancy f1.4 lens doesn't mean you always have to shoot at f1.4. If you notice that your image is looking a little soft at f1.4, try stopping down to f1.8, f2, or even f2.8 to see if it makes any difference. By the way, if you're struggling to get sharp photos, you can check out my hit video right up here to help you out. Guys, thank you so much for watching and stick around to listen to what my sponsor Squarespace has to say. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to create beautiful websites. No coding knowledge needed. Just simply choose from their many templates and designs. Perfect for photographers and online shop owners. Use my link down below for a 14-day free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can use my code JASONVONG to save 10% off your first purchase of your website or domain. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys in the next video. Peace. I forgot what I should turn off first. I should turn off this one first, and then this one, and then this one.